Welcome back, and as part of our running series Katiba at 10, we shall be taking a look at where we are at as far as the Constitution is concerned. And joining us right now is Professor Yashpal Gai, who is a renowned constitutional expert, as well as he did chair one phase of Kenya's constitution making process. He advised on the development of the current constitution as it is right now. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you.
Now, let us start off and let us take ourselves back in history to the point where we were thinking, you and the team that was behind the current constitution were thinking of what to get out of this constitution, what changes were necessary, and what you're envisioning. What were the aspirations, if I may put it that way, of the current constitution when you were crafting it?
Okay, it's a long list.
Yeah.
You want me to start now?
Yes, please.
Thank you for asking me to comment on these issues. As you rightly say, I was involved in the process which led to the adoption, not so much of this constitution we are talking about, but what we call the Burma's constitution, which was adopted in 2004, but killed soon after by politicians who didn't like the orientation of that constitution. It was very much a people cared constitution. And since then, we went through 10 very difficult years when a lot of people were killed and there were a lot of ethnic conflicts. So then, after a number of years of great loss of life and other things, the government was persuaded to go back to the original constitution. They didn't do quite that, but this constitution that we have now is substantially based on the earlier document. So I want to give this as a background, because I want to show how our politicians are so self-centered and they do not really care at all about the people of this country, so long as they can achieve what they want to. And even now, as we look at the BBI project and so on, it is clear that while all of us are focusing on the constitution, discussing it, they don't care about that. They are already planned changes to this constitution. So this is a sort of a background, I think, to what I want to say. Now, to your several questions, which you may have to repeat. I may not be able to remember all the points you made. I would say that we still have reason to be proud of the constitution that we are now celebrating for its 10th year.
Okay, now Professor, just to take you back to my original question, I would like to know what the motivation was behind the changes or the original document that you're talking about. What were some of the things that were happening in the country that necessitated a new constitution?
Well, I think there were a number of reasons. One reason was that we were not really a nation. When the British left, the hope was that there will be the notion, understanding that we are one nation, regardless of religions and color and so on. History, and then we will be all Kenyans. Well, this never really happened, partly because Jomo Kenyatta was very selfish and he wanted only his own tribe's people to benefit. And that sort of continued with his predecessor, Moi. And I think the impetus for the Constitution came at the end of the Cold War, when the international community made peace among themselves, and they also put pressure on countries in Africa and Asia to change their constitutions, to take away authoritarianism, to give people their rights. And under that pressure, the first move towards this present constitution was made. Now, eventually, when this constitution was adopted, it was 100% that, but nevertheless, the essential principles were there. I do think that this is a very good constitution.
Right. Now, given that it is a good constitution that necessitated things such as devolution that would see resources go down to the grassroots level and people benefiting in an equal way, do you think we have managed to ensure that the intention of things such as devolution is actualized and the people at the lower level are able to benefit in a way that makes them basically happy?
The simple answer is absolutely not.
Okay.
This is just a document on paper. There is very, very little respect for it in the government. I could give you many examples if we had more time.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
I've already hinted that they are doing things, they are completely inconsistent with the values and definition of this constitution. This constitution is well drafted. It's really written in a way that any Kenyan, anyone in fact, would be able to understand. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be a constitutional lawyer. You can read it, written in simple style, simple language, and giving constantly indications of what must be done to achieve particular values of the Constitution. The values of the Constitution or of the people of this country we aspire to is spelled out in very simple language. And so on the surface of it, this is a very good Constitution. And though it is not perfect, its implementation would do us a great deal of good, to the poor people, to women, to minorities who have all the time been discriminated against.
Yeah.
Now, you know, there have been studies, and I have done some myself, as to what actually has happened, which is your question. It's okay to read this wonderful document, we become very enthusiastic, but then you have to see, has it had any impact on our lifestyle? And my answer is very clear, no. It has not really made any difference to the ordinary people. And indeed, if you compare the living standards of the poor people, 10 years ago, it has got worse. Rather than improve under this constitution, their living standard has gone worse. You have just that in the streets, in rural areas, people, I would say, there are of course some people who have become extremely rich. This is not so much because of the Constitution. This is because they have their friends in the government. There is a lot of corruption in this country among the politicians, among business people. Nobody can deny that. So if you look at the kind of situation we are as a nation, as a people, you will find almost in every area a weakening of the life standards of, I would say, 60% of the people from the time the Constitution was actually brought into force, whereas a very small number of people, mostly related to the 5 ethnic communities who run the country, not you and I, and the situation looks very different.
Okay.
This Constitution has no impact at all on lifestyles of people, on the economy, on coming together as a people, as a nation, which is pronounced strongly in the Constitution.
Now, Professor, you've talked about corruption. This constitution is quite big on integrity and measures that should be taken against corruption because it's quite draft before, even and after the constitution, the promulgation of the 2010 constitution. What do you think are the major challenges that have hindered this being a protector to the common wananchi and their taxes?
Well, I think if we did 2 or 3 things, we would be able to solve some of these problems. The first thing which puzzles me very much is that the Constitution states very, very, very clearly what are the obligations of public servants and politicians. And there's a whole chapter on this subject. Very early on, some people went to court saying, look here, the public servants, and they mentioned names also of those, have completely violated these requirements about integrity and fairness and so on. But somehow the courts ignored it. This was within, I would say, a year of the Constitution coming into force. And since then, at least 2 chapters of the Constitution which deal with the integrity of the public servants sets out clearly what they can do, are done every day. And everyone knows about this. Yeah. The president, he does that himself. So I feel that is become not the weakness of the Constitution, but at that time the weakness of the judiciary, who sort of were overawed by the government, by the intimidation from the government, by people happy to bribe to get what they want, rather than to stand for morals. So that has been with this country as long as the Constitution came in. I mean, it was, of course, there before, but the framework we have and the instruments we have to fight that were never used, and even the judiciary, which has normally been pretty good, made any use of it. So I think the whole chunk of the Constitution has been completely ignored, is ignored every hour of the day. And I think some people have gone to courts since then, and we ourselves in Katiba Institute have taken measures. But the government gets away, just disregards it, and nothing more happens.
The judiciary and the headwinds that they are facing, then does that speak of the powers of the executive as far as they're being held to account by Parliament, and of course the independence of the judiciary? What do you think that is not being met as far as this Constitution and its implementation is concerned?
Well, then, in my view, this Constitution gives too much power to the president.
Okay.
In the original draft, actually we had a prime minister and not a president. Big difference. The parliamentary system is very fair, all people get involved, a lot of accountability. But at the very last minute, they shifted it to what we now call the presidential system. And I think we are given too much power to the president,
right,
and has just taken over powers that don't belong to the president.
Okay, and let's talk about the elections, because we do have a lot of conflict surrounding it. Sometimes it's literal conflicts on our streets, and other times it's at the political level. What was ideally set out to be the situation and the systems by this constitution, and do you think that is being reflected on how we continually handle our electoral processes?
Well, I think elections is a very central element in a democratic country. Mm-hmm. That is where people have a big voice, because people choose every 5 years members of government, some other positions as well. And we expect a process which is of choosing, deciding on who wins the elections. We require strongly an effective and efficient, honest institution.
Yes.
And as we know, or we think, that our electoral system looks absolutely wonderful. If you look at the text of it in the Constitution, mm-hmm. read carefully, and you would say, wow, mm-hmm. we are never going to have any problems now. But they have been bribed, they have been intimidated, and today I think nobody believes that any of our elections have been fair elections. You ask Mr. Odinga what he thinks of it, because he has suffered from the illegalities that are exercised. If there were more time, I could give you much detail as to how every single election we have had, which has produced the president, has been has ignored the framework in the Constitution of elections. And I think that is one of the most important elements in a democratic society, that people every now and then, 5 years in our case, to in their leaders, punish those who have been dishonest, reward those who have had a good record in public, and so on. And this has never been applied. I mean, I would say, though not entirely accurately, that very few of our politicians we have respect for. They are fighting among themselves, they are going for money. So our elections do not produce people of integrity, of intelligence, commitment to the country. You touched it rightly. It is one of the most important elements in the working and the construction of a democratic country. Okay. And we have on paper excellent, in practice hardly ever.
Right. Now, given that you've talked about how wonderful this document is and the problem being in implementation, so how does it sit with you as the country goes towards a referendum and the BBI documents being said to be the answer to some of our problems? Those elements of unity, diversity, democracy, economic and social development are some of the things that one would say were also the motivation behind this constitution that we have. So when you see the country going towards yet another change, a referendum, and the BBI being touted as the answer, how does that sit with you?
Well, of course, it makes me extremely depressed. I had very high hopes that under this constitution we would change the whole structure of the country, of relationships between people. We won't say, well, he is a Kikuyu, he is this, he is that, and he is just a Hindi, you can ignore him. I thought we would put that past behind us and look towards, and the constitution emphasizes this, that the purpose of this constitution is to create one nation, one people. You will find about 4 references to that major objective. Despite our different cultures, religions, which we value and which we acknowledge, that we also have, as citizens of Kenya, certain solidarities. We have to observe certain principles, and we have ignored the last element. And I don't know how, and my worry is, I have been studying the IBBC efforts as well, and in the early days, I was asked by them to advise them. When I told them how they didn't have to do all that they are proposing, that one of your leaders is also the president, and he has enormous powers to achieve all the objectives now you are listing in BBI. And then they don't like when I say that, and after very early discussions, they said, they stopped inviting me to their meetings. And I feel that if we study the process of BBI, how it started, how much money it has cost the country, billions, how much anxiety, how much quarrels among politicians themselves, whereas this constitution is waiting there to be used. And I guess my basic problem is that we have a good constitution, but it's a piece of paper. That's exaggeration. There are many good things which are implemented, which are used. The one thing, let me draw your attention to, which I feel most strongly about, that we have the best Bill of Rights in the entire country. I have, as you probably know too, and but it is hardly ever respected. And we can solve all our problems, I think, or mostly all our problems, if we just follow the long chapter on human rights.
Now, Professor, before we run out of time, I would like you to comment on our failure to implement the 2/3 gender rule, because this also falls in line with the the hope for diversity, particularly in positions of leadership. What is your take on that?
Well, that makes me very sad. During the Beaumont process, when we were drafting this document, I always insisted women have a senior position, of course, in the country, equal rights, but in the process of drawing it in the assembly, I always gave them priority. I had this Nobel Prize winner, the late winner, who's
Wangari Maathai.
Yeah, and I always gave her a great priority whenever there was a discussion going on. I had a small group I had established to advise me routinely. She was chairing that body, and I thought that we have always treated badly women. Now was the time to make up for it. And women did a very good job in the discussions. But then, what has happened? I mean, because it's a woman, the law that has been broken, fundamentally broken, because it applies to women, the politicians don't bother to redress that, to follow the instructions of the judiciary. This has gone on for a long time now. I would say ever since the Constitution came into force. For me, this is such an important element of our society, equal rights for men, women, children, that who can you blame but a small group of politicians?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Yashpal Gai, for being part of the conversation right here. Professor Yashpal Gai is a renowned constitutional expert, and he chaired one phase of the Kenya constitution-making process. He has advice on constitutional development in many other countries, and he has glowing remarks about the document that we have and we call a constitution, but quite unhappy with its implementation. Thank you so much for your sentiments. We are going, I see Mike peering into his phone. Perhaps we have sentiments from the watchers on what they think of the Constitution and what's happening.
Well, yes, not much reaction, but the few that have come through are not very happy with the implementation, as we've also heard from the professor, the good professor, that majority, we have a good constitution which really should have taken us from where we were before to where we are now. But according to what Yashpal Gai has mentioned, is that Kenyans are even more poorer than they were before the implementation or the birth of the new constitution. But there you go. And well, that's basically what is out there, which is quite disappointing. And we are at the verge of a referendum, which leaves us wondering whether really we need one, because as he says, it's just a document unless it is brought to life.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to leave you in the safe hands of Robin Toskin, who will take the show all the way to the end with the very latest in sports. But for now, I think I shall say adieu. Robin?
Thank you very much, Trix and Michael. And we'll be talking about what is happening around the world. Bayern Munich have actually been crowned the the European champions last night after beating PSG by a goal to nil.
Okay, we shall leave you to it, Robin.
Thank you very much, Trix.